In the sun-scorched valleys of Sonora, Mexico, where the land speaks through whispers of dust and forgotten promises, Manuel Torres tends to his ancestral farm, a sprawling 200-acre testament to 3 generations of his family's determination. His calloused hands, shaped by decades of working the earth, tell a different story than the deadly precision they once possessed as a special forces sniper in Mexico's elite military unit. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The year is 2023, and the Torres farm stands as one of the last independent properties in a region increasingly dominated by the ruthless Zarate cartel. What the cartel doesn't know is that this seemingly ordinary farmer they're about to confront was once known as El Fantasma, the Ghost, with confirmed kills at distances that made him a legend in military circles. Manuel's morning routine is interrupted by the sound of approaching vehicles. Through his kitchen window, he spots 3 black SUVs kicking up dust along the private road leading to his house. His daughter Elena, visiting from university in Monterrey, notices her father's expression harden, a glimpse of the soldier he once was bleeding through his farmer's facade. "Papa, what's wrong?" Elena asks, setting down her coffee. "Call your Uncle Diego at the Federales," Manuel responds, his voice steady but urgent. "Tell him it's happening." He moves to his gun safe, hidden behind a false panel in the pantry, where his old Barrett M82 sniper rifle lies dormant alongside other remnants of his military past. The vehicles stop in a triangle formation around his front yard. 8 men emerge, led by Javier Zarate, the cartel's second in command, known for his preference for theatrical violence. Manuel recognizes him from the news, the butcher responsible for the mass graves found near Ciudad Obregón last month. "Señor Torres!" Javier's voice carries across the yard with false warmth. "Beautiful morning for a business discussion, no?" Manuel steps onto his porch, projecting the image of a simple farmer. Elena watches from inside, phone pressed to her ear, speaking urgently with her uncle. The contrast between the approaching cartel members in their tactical gear and Manuel in his worn work clothes couldn't be starker. "My land isn't for sale, Señor Zarate," Manuel replies calmly. "As I told your associates last week." Javier's smile doesn't waver as he pulls out a tablet. "Perhaps you misunderstand. I'm not here to buy." He turns the screen toward Manuel, showing drone footage of his property. "Your land sits on what will become a crucial transit route. The question isn't if you'll sell, it's how much pain you're willing to endure before the inevitable." Manuel notices the subtle movements of Javier's men, their practiced positioning, the way they're establishing firing lines. They're not just cartel thugs, these are trained mercenaries. His mind automatically calculates distances, wind speed, potential cover points, old habits that never died. "You have 24 hours to accept our generous offer," Javier continues. "After that, well..." He gestures to one of his men, who throws a burlap sack at Manuel's feet. It lands with a wet thud, and blood begins seeping through the fabric. "We found your farmhand Miguel trying to reach the Federales this morning. Consider this a courtesy call." Manuel's expression doesn't change, but something shifts in his eyes, a coldness that Elena has never seen before. She watches as her father kneels down, seemingly defeated, to check the sack. But she doesn't miss his quick glance at the surrounding terrain, the way his fingers flex. Subtle movements that speak volumes about the warrior beneath the farmer's weathered exterior. 24 hours, Torres," Javier calls out as they return to their vehicles. "Don't make the mistake of thinking you have a choice." As the SUVs disappear in a cloud of dust, Elena rushes to her father. "Papa, Uncle Diego says he can have a team here by tomorrow morning, but..." "Tomorrow will be too late," Manuel interrupts, already moving with purpose toward his barn. "They'll return tonight. Javier Zarate doesn't give warnings he doesn't plan to enforce immediately. He pulls back a false wall, revealing a small armory, a testament to years of preparing for this inevitable confrontation. How long have you known this would happen? Elena asks, following him into the barn. Manuel checks the action on his rifle, muscle memory from thousands of repetitions taking over. Since the cartels started buying up the neighboring farms 3 years ago, I've watched them systematically take control of every strategic property in the valley. He pauses, looking at his daughter. Elena, I need you to leave. Take the back road to your uncle's station in... No! She interrupts, her jaw set with the same determination he recognizes from her mother. Mama didn't raise me to run, and you didn't train me all these years for nothing. Manuel wants to argue, but the distant sound of helicopter rotors cuts through the air. He moves to the barn door, using his scope to scan the horizon. 3 military-grade helicopters approach from the south. Not Mexican military, but cartel aircraft painted in false colors. They're not waiting 24 hours, Elena observes, her hand steady on the rifle she's retrieved from the armory. No, Manuel agrees, already formulating a plan. They're not. He reaches into his pocket and pulls out a worn military challenge coin, his lucky charm from his sniper days. But neither are we. The sun begins its descent toward the horizon, casting long shadows across the Torres farm. As Manuel makes his final preparations, he can't help but smile grimly at the irony. The cartel chose this land for its strategic value, never realizing they were about to face a man who had spent years turning every inch of it into a sniper's paradise. As dusk settles over the Sonoran farmland, Manuel and Elena work with practiced efficiency. Years of contingency planning unfold in minutes, hidden caches of ammunition and supplies emerging from beneath innocent-looking farm equipment. Elena activates the solar-powered camera system her father installed throughout the property, while Manuel retrieves topographical maps marked with pre-calculated distances and firing positions. They'll come from multiple directions, Manuel explains, pointing to key locations. The helicopters are a show of force, but they're also practical. They'll try to use thermal imaging to track us. He moves to a shelf and pulls out several military-grade thermal blankets. Good thing your old man stayed paranoid all these years. The distant thrum of helicopter rotors grows louder, accompanied now by the rumble of approaching vehicles. Through his scope, Manuel counts 12 SUVs, approaching along different access roads. The cartel isn't taking chances. They've brought at least 40 men, he observes, noting their movements. Former military, judging by their formations, probably Colombian or Venezuelan mercenaries. He hands Elena a satellite phone. If things go wrong... They won't, Elena interrupts, checking her rifle's action. Her hands move with the same fluid precision as her father's, the result of countless weekend hunting trips that were actually combat training sessions in disguise. Manuel nods, pride mixing with concern. Remember what I taught you about urban warfare? This is the opposite. Out here, distance is your friend. Don't let them get close. He moves to a hidden trapdoor in the barn floor, revealing a network of irrigation tunnels he'd modified over the years. They'll expect us to defend from the house. That's their first mistake. The helicopters arrive first, their searchlights cutting through the growing darkness. A voice booms from speakers. Manuel Torres, you have 5 minutes to surrender before we begin. Think of your daughter. Elena's grip tightens on her rifle, but Manuel remains calm. He reaches into his pocket and produces 2 pairs of night vision goggles, military grade, not the commercial variants. They think they have the advantage in the dark, he says with a grim smile. Let's prove them wrong. The first shot comes from the helicopters, a warning burst that kicks up dirt near the house. Manuel and Elena are already moving through the tunnel system, emerging in a prepared position half a kilometer away. Through his scope, Manuel watches the cartel forces begin their advance. Their tactics are professional, but they're fighting the last war. They don't realize they're walking into a killing field designed by one of Mexico's most legendary snipers. "Remember," Manuel whispers to Elena as she sets up her position, "we're not trying to win a prolonged engagement, we just need to hold them off until..." A massive explosion rocks the night as the first vehicle hits one of Manuel's hidden IEDs. The blast illuminates the scene like daylight, revealing the careful trap they've walked into. The cartel forces are spread out across open ground, their positions marked by pre-ranged markers that look like ordinary farming equipment. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Manuel's Barrett roars, the heavy .50 caliber round finding its mark in one of the helicopter's tail rotors. The aircraft spins wildly before its pilot manages to auto-rotate to a rough landing. Elena's lighter rifle cracks in harmony, picking off cartel members attempting to reach the downed helicopter. "They're falling back to regroup," Elena reports, tracking movement through her scope. "But the other helicopters are moving to higher altitudes. They're staying out of range." Manuel nods, already moving to their next pre-planned position. "They'll try to surround us now. They still think we're in a fixed position." He pauses, noting movement at the farm's perimeter. They're bringing in their heavy weapons, RPGs, probably mortars. Through her night vision goggles, Elena spots Javier Zarate coordinating the attack from behind an armored SUV. "I have a shot on their leader," she whispers. "Not yet," Manuel cautions. "He's too valuable. They'll have a dead man switch or contingency plans if he dies. We need to bleed them first." The night erupts into chaos as the cartel forces launch their coordinated assault. Mortars rain down on the house and barn, but find only empty buildings. Manuel's shots come from impossible angles, each one finding its mark with devastating precision. The cartel forces can't advance without exposing themselves to firing positions they can't locate. Elena proves herself her father's daughter, using the skills honed over years of secret training. Her shots are methodical, disciplined, targeting radio operators and squad leaders, disrupting the cartel's command and control. "Papa," she whispers suddenly, "look at their vehicles." Manuel shifts his scope, immediately seeing what caught her attention. The SUV's license plates all carry the same prefix. "Military," he confirms. "They're using Mexican Army vehicles. That's why they moved up their timeline. They can't keep them long without questions being asked." A new sound joins the battlefield, the distinctive whir of drone motors. Small commercial drones fitted with thermal cameras begin searching the area. Manuel and Elena's thermal blankets hide them from direct detection, but they can't move. Without exposing themselves, they're adapting, Manuel observes. "Time to show them our next surprise." He pulls out a small radio controller, its antenna modified for extended range. "Remember those irrigation control upgrades I installed last spring?" Elena's eyes widen as she realizes what her father has planned. With the press of a button, the farm's sprinkler system roars to life, not spraying water, but a mixture of chemicals that creates a dense, obscuring fog. The thermal cameras on the drones and helicopters become useless, their view completely obscured by the artificial cloud cover. "The wind will clear it in 10 minutes, Manuel explains, already moving. "That's how long we have to reach the final position." He hands Elena a detonator. "When I give the signal, trigger it, all of them." As they move through their hidden tunnel network, Elena can't help but ask, "How long have you really been preparing for this?" Manuel's response is interrupted by the sound of miniguns from the helicopters, spraying the fog bank with thousands of rounds per minute. "Since the day your mother died," he finally answers. "Since I learned what happens when you're not ready. For the worst." The artificial fog begins to dissipate, revealing the extent of the battlefield. Scattered fires from the exploded vehicles cast an eerie glow across the Torres farm. Manuel and Elena have reached their final position, a reinforced grain silo that offers a commanding view of the entire property. Through their night vision goggles, they watch Javier Zarate ordering his remaining forces to establish a perimeter. There, pulling back to defensive positions, Elena observes, noting the disciplined withdrawal. Why aren't they pressing the attack? Manuel checks his watch. Because they know what we know, the sun rises in 40 minutes. They think daylight will give them the advantage. He pulls out a satellite phone, checking for signals. Your uncle's team should be less than an hour. Out, we just need to hold. A new sound cuts through the night, the deep rumble of heavy vehicles approaching from the east. Through his scope, Manuel spots 3 armored personnel carriers, their silhouettes unmistakably military. Those aren't cartel vehicles, he mutters. They've bought off someone high up in the army. How can you tell? Elena asks, tracking the vehicles through her scope. The markings are too perfect, too new. When cartels steal military vehicles, they usually try to obscure or age the identifiers. Manuel's expression darkens. This is an official deployment, just not a legitimate one. The APCs deploy their troops with military precision. Unlike the earlier mercenaries, these men move with the cohesion that only comes from years of fighting. Together, Manuel recognizes their tactics from his own military days. Special forces, he confirms, probably an entire platoon that's been bought out. He shifts his position slightly. This complicates things. They'll know all the standard counter-sniper procedures. Elena's radio crackles. They're broadcasting on military frequencies now. Manuel Torres, a new voice calls out, professional and measured. This is Captain Rivera of the 7th Special Forces Group. You have 5 minutes to surrender before we declare this a military operation zone and respond with appropriate force. Manuel's jaw tightens. Rivera, he whispers. I trained him myself 10 years ago. He was one of my best students. Can we trust him? Elena asks, hope creeping into her voice. No, Manuel responds firmly. The Rivera I knew died the moment. He took cartel money. He makes a slight adjustment to his scope. But he'll remember what I taught him about siege warfare. Every position has a weakness if you know where to look. The Special Forces begin a methodical sweep of the property, using thermal scanners and ground-penetrating radar to search for hidden bunkers or tunnel networks. They're thorough, professional, everything Manuel taught them to be. They'll find the tunnels soon, Elena notes, tension in her voice. Manuel nods. Yes, but that's what we want. Remember what I always told you about hunting. Sometimes you have to think like the prey to trap the predator. A series of explosions rocks the perimeter as the Special Forces trigger several of Manuel's buried charges. But unlike the earlier cartel forces, they don't panic. They use the explosions to map out safe corridors, slowly constricting the area they need to search. Papa, Elena whispers urgently. They're splitting into 3 groups. Classic. Pincer movement. Manuel watches through his scope as Rivera deploys his men with textbook precision. He's using my own tactics against me, he notes with grim appreciation. But he forgot the most important lesson I taught him. Never assume you know all your enemy's capabilities. The sky begins to lighten, the first hints of dawn, painting the horizon in shades of purple and orange. The Special Forces teams are closing in on the grain silo, moving from cover to cover with practiced efficiency. Now, Elena asks, her finger hovering over the detonator. Manuel holds up his hand, waiting. The Special Forces are almost in position, their confidence growing as they detect the heat signatures in the silo. Rivera himself leads the main assault team, just as Manuel taught him. A commander should never ask his men to take risks he wouldn't take himself. Papa, we're running out of time, Elena warns, counting at least 30 men converging on their position. Wait, Manuel insists, making minute adjustments to his scope. Through the lens, he can see Rivera's face clearly now, illuminated by the growing dawn. The young officer's expression shows no hesitation, no remorse, just cold determination. The Special Forces team reaches the base of the silo. Rivera signals for the breach charges to be placed. Above them, Manuel finally allows himself a small smile. "You taught us to always confirm our targets," Rivera calls out, his voice carrying clearly in the morning air. "To never take the obvious. A shot. Remember, Sergeant Torres?" "I remember," Manuel replies, his voice echoing from hidden speakers across the property. "I also taught you something else, Captain." Rivera freezes, suddenly realizing his mistake. His thermal imaging equipment shows clear heat signatures in the silo, but Manuel's voice is coming from everywhere and nowhere. "What was it you taught us about heat signatures, Sergeant?" Rivera asks, but his voice has lost its confidence. "I taught you," Manuel replies, "that the best snipers don't just set up ambushes." He pauses for effect. "They create illusions." Eleanor presses the detonator. The grain silo erupts, not in an explosion, but in a massive cloud of superheated corn and grain dust. The thermal signatures that had drawn in the Special Forces team were actually carefully calibrated heating elements, creating the perfect bait for troops relying on thermal imaging. The dust cloud blinds the Special Forces team's night vision and thermal equipment. In the confusion, Manuel's first shot finds its mark, not killing Rivera, but destroying his radio with surgical precision. The Special Forces teams are now cut off from their command and control. In the chaos following the grain silo trap, Manuel and Elena are already moving through their final contingency route, a narrow maintenance shaft that connects to the irrigation system's main control station. The Special Forces teams, their advanced equipment rendered useless by the grain dust, have scattered into smaller units, falling back on basic infantry tactics. "They'll regroup in 3 minutes," Manuel explains as they move. "Rivera will switch to analog communications, hand signals, and emergency frequencies." He checks his watch. "The sun's almost up. We need to reach the control station before they establish visual containment." Elena follows close behind, her movements precise despite the exhaustion starting to set in. "What about Javier? He's been too quiet." As if in answer, the rhythmic thud of helicopter rotors grows louder. Through gaps in the tunnel's maintenance hatches, they catch glimpses of 2 Cartel gunships rising above the farm, their silhouettes menacing against the pre-dawn sky. These aren't the converted civilian aircraft from earlier. They're military-grade attack helicopters, their weapon systems clearly visible. "Those are Russian," Manuel notes grimly. "My 24 Hinds, the cartels must have new suppliers." He pauses at a junction, checking their position against a memorized map. This changes things. The control station's steel roof won't hold against their cannons. Elena processes this information, her tactical training kicking in. "The tunnels won't protect us forever. They'll bring in ground-penetrating radar, maybe even seismic sensors." "They already have them," Manuel confirms, "but they won't use them yet." Rivera knows better than to send his men into these tunnels blind. He remembers what happened to Charlie Team during the Sinaloa operation. They reach a reinforced door marked with faded maintenance warnings. Manuel enters a code into a hidden keypad, revealing a command center that would look more at home in a military installation than a farm. Multiple monitors show feeds from surviving cameras across the property, while others display thermal imaging and motion detection data. "All these years," Eleanor whispers, taking in the sophisticated setup. The equipment upgrades, the irrigation, improvements. It was all for this moment. Manuel moves to the main console, his fingers flying over the keyboards. "After your mother was killed by the cartels, I swore it would never happen again. Every peso we could spare went into preparing for this day." He pulls up a satellite view of the surrounding area. I knew eventually they'd come for the farm. This valley is too strategic for them to ignore. The monitors show Rivera's teams regrouping, establishing new positions with professional efficiency. The Special Forces soldiers have switched to old-school techniques, field glasses and signal mirrors instead of compromised high-tech gear. Meanwhile, the attack helicopters begin a search pattern, their powerful spotlights sweeping the ground. They're being careful now, Elena observes. No more rushing in. Manuel nods, initiating a series of commands on the system. Rivera's realized, this isn't just a sniper's nest. It's a prepared battlefield. He's fighting against years of planning, against every lesson I ever taught him about asymmetric warfare. Suddenly the radio crackles. Sergeant Torres. Rivera's voice is calm, measured. I know you can hear me. I remember everything you taught us about ground control points and fields of fire. This farm, it's a masterpiece of defensive engineering. Manuel remains silent, but his hands continue moving across the keyboard, preparing something. The cartels don't know what they're dealing with, Rivera continues. But I do. I remember the stories about El Fantasma, the ghost who could make a shot at 2 kilometers in high winds, the sniper who could disappear into terrain like a shadow. Elena watches her father's expression, seeing something shift in his eyes at the mention of his old call sign. You prepared for everything, Sergeant, Rivera acknowledges. Every possible angle of attack, every technological advantage we might have. But you made one mistake. There's a pause. You assumed I came alone. Multiple alarms suddenly blare across the command center's monitors. Heat signatures appear on all sides. Not just the Special Forces teams they've been tracking, but new units emerging from concealed positions far outside the farm's perimeter. He had teams waiting in reserve, Elena realizes. They've been there since before the attack began. Manuel's expression remains unchanged, but his fingers move faster across the controls. Yes, he remembered another lesson. Always hold back your strongest assets until the enemy commits fully to their strategy. The new teams are closing in fast, their movements suggesting they've been waiting for this moment, studying the terrain. These aren't cartel mercenaries or corrupted special forces. These are something else entirely. Foreign contractors, Manuel identifies, watching their tactics. Probably ex-Spetsnaz or similar. The cartels have deeper connections than we thought. He turns to Elena. This was never about our land. They needed someone like Rivera to flush out their real target. Me. Elena's eyes widen with understanding. They want to recruit you? No, Manuel corrects grimly. They want to eliminate me. A sniper with my skills, who knows their operations, who trained their turned military assets. I'm a loose end they can't afford. He pulls up new satellite imagery, showing more vehicles approaching from multiple directions. Rivera's job wasn't to capture the farm. It was to confirm I'm still as good as the stories say. The attack helicopters suddenly break formation, moving to new positions that effectively cut off any possible escape routes. On the ground, the foreign contractors continue their advance, using sophisticated electronic warfare equipment to jam any possible communications. They're not trying to flush us out anymore, Elena notes, watching the tactical situation deteriorate. They're setting up for a siege. Manuel stands, moving to a locked cabinet in the corner. Yes, which means it's time for my final lesson. He opens the cabinet, revealing not weapons, but a series of hard drives and documents. Sometimes the best shot isn't the one you take. It's the one you make them think you're going to take. Elena follows his gaze to another monitor, this one showing a live feed of Javier Zarate coordinating with the helicopter pilots. The cartel leader's confidence has returned, believing he now has the legendary El Fantasma cornered. Papa, Elena says slowly, what haven't you told me about this farm? Manuel moves to a hidden panel in the command center's wall, revealing a sophisticated communications array. This farm isn't just our home, Elena. It's been my intelligence-gathering station for the past decade. His fingers fly across another keyboard, initiating encrypted protocols. Every cartel convoy that passed through this valley, every corrupt military transport, every illegal shipment, I've documented all of it. Elena watches as multiple screens light up with surveillance footage, financial records, and satellite imagery. You've been building a case against them, not just the cartels, Manuel clarifies, inserting one of the hard drives into a secure terminal. Their entire network, corrupt officials, international connections, money laundering operations. I needed proof of how deep the corruption goes. He pulls up files showing military personnel records, including Rivera's. Your Uncle Diego isn't the only honest cop left, but sometimes it feels that way. The sound of explosions rocks the command center as the attack helicopters begin targeting suspected tunnel entrances. Through the monitors, they watch the foreign contractors deploying sophisticated tunnel detection equipment. We have maybe 20 minutes before they find this position, Manuel calculates. Rivera knows my playbook. He'll recognize that all the obvious defensive positions are just decoys leading to this central hub. Elena checks her ammunition, mind racing through tactical options. So everything until now, the sniper positions, the traps, it was all to protect this intelligence? Partially, Manuel acknowledges, still working at the terminal, but also to validate it. Tonight's attack proves everything in these files. The cartel's military-grade helicopters, their connection to foreign mercenaries, the corrupted special forces units. It's all documented now, in action. A new alarm sounds as one of the foreign contractor teams discovers a tunnel junction. Their specialized equipment begins mapping the underground network, methodically working toward the command center's location. They're using Swedish-made seismic mapping tools, Manuel notes, watching their progress. Top of the line, not even available to most military units. The cartels have deeper international ties than anyone suspected. Elena moves to another monitor, tracking Rivera's teams as they establish a coordinated perimeter. They're not just trying to kill us anymore. They want to contain whatever information you have. Manuel nods, initiating what appears to be a complex data transfer protocol, which is exactly what I was counting on. Your mother. He pauses, emotion briefly cracking his professional demeanor. Maria wasn't just killed by the cartels. She was investigating their connections to certain international banking institutions. Understanding dawns in Elena's eyes. She was the one who started gathering intelligence. Yes, she worked for the Federal Banking Commission's anti-money laundering unit. When she got too close to exposing their operation, they made it look like a random cartel killing. Manuel's voice hardens. But she'd already hidden copies of her initial findings. That's why I bought this farm, not just for the tactical position, but because it sits at the intersection of their main trafficking routes. The command center shakes as another explosion hits closer. The foreign contractors are getting more precise with their tunnel mapping. On the monitors, Rivera's teams begin moving specialized breaching equipment into position. Papa, Elena says urgently, we need to move. They'll breach this position in minutes. Manuel holds up his hand, watching progress bars on multiple screens. Not yet. The data transfer needs to complete. He pulls up another screen, showing a complex network diagram. Your mother's investigation and my decade of surveillance. It's all flowing through hidden servers, being verified and cross-referenced by trusted contacts in multiple agencies. Elena checks the monitors again, watching as the attack helicopters adjust their position. They're setting up for a final assault. Whatever you're planning is already done, Manuel interrupts, pressing a final sequence of keys. The screens suddenly fill with confirmation messages in multiple languages. The evidence is being simultaneously delivered to Interpol, the DEA, and trusted journalists in 17 countries. But more importantly, he pulls up live satellite imagery, showing multiple vehicles converging on their position from the north. That data transfer was also broadcasting our location to every legitimate law enforcement agency within 100 kilometers. The radio crackles again. "Sergeant Torres!" Rivera's voice has lost its professional calm. "We're picking up multiple federal police and military units approaching. Whatever you're trying is already accomplished, Captain," Manuel replies calmly into the radio. "You taught me another valuable lesson tonight, the importance of having forces in reserve." He switches channels. "Diego, do you copy?" "Loud and clear, hermano," Eleanor's uncle responds. "We're 3 minutes out with Federal Special Forces and DEA tactical teams. Your evidence transmission triggered every red flag in the system. Even the corrupt commanders can't ignore this level of activity." Manuel turns to Elena, pride evident in his expression. "Your mother taught me that bullets alone can't win this kind of war. Information, proof of their corruption, that's the real weapon." He moves to another hidden panel, revealing a final surprise, but she also taught me to always have a backup plan. The panel slides away to show a heavily reinforced passage leading deep underground. This tunnel leads to an old mining shaft. It comes out 5 kilometers away. He hands Elena a waterproof case containing one of the hard drives. "Take this to the secondary rendezvous point. Your uncle's men will meet you there." Elena's expression hardens. "I'm not leaving you." "Yes, you are," Manuel insists. "Because someone needs to testify about what happened here tonight. Someone they can't dismiss as a paranoid ex-soldier." He checks the monitors one final time. Besides, a sniper always works best alone. Before Elena can protest further, the command center rocks with another explosion. Much closer this time, the foreign contractors have found them. Through the monitors, they watch Rivera organizing his men for a final breach. The command center's reinforced walls groan under sustained assault as Rivera's teams begin their breach. Manuel quickly erases the system's hard drives, while Elena reluctantly gathers essential supplies for her escape route. "You have 5 minutes to reach the mining shaft's main chamber," Manuel explains, handing her a detailed map. "Follow the red markers. There's a cache of supplies at checkpoint 3. He checks his Barrett one final time. "Once you're clear, trigger the remote detonator. It will collapse the tunnel behind you." "What about you?" Elena demands, shouldering her pack. Manuel moves to a concealed firing position overlooking the command center's main entrance. "I'll keep them busy." Rivera may know my tactics, but he's forgotten the most important lesson. A sniper's greatest weapon isn't his rifle, it's his patience. The wall nearest them buckles as shaped charges detonate. Manuel pushes Elena toward the escape tunnel. "Go. Now." Their eyes meet one final time before Elena disappears into the darkness, sealing the hidden panel behind her. Manuel activates his last defense, a series of automated turrets that begin spraying the breach points with suppressing fire. Through his thermal scope, he watches the foreign contractors deploying mobile cover, their movements indicating extensive urban warfare experience. "Impressive equipment," he mutters, recognizing Czech-made ballistic shields. "Let's see how it holds up against armor-piercing rounds." His Barrett roars, the heavy round punching through one shield and continuing through the wall behind it. The foreign contractors immediately scatter, their tactical cohesion momentarily broken by the shocking display of firepower. "Sergeant!" Rivera calls out through the chaos. "You're only delaying the inevitable. The tunnels are mapped. We have your daughter's heat signature on motion trackers." Manuel allows himself a small smile, switching positions as return fire chews through his previous location. "Always verify your intelligence, Captain. Remember?" He triggers another set of charges, filling adjacent tunnels with the same superheated grain dust that disrupted their equipment earlier. The motion trackers go haywire, showing dozens of false heat signatures. The attack helicopters hover closer, their spotlight beams cutting through smoke and dust as they search for targets. Manuel uses their own light against them, the glare creating perfect shooting conditions through his scope. His next shot takes out the lead helicopter's radar array, forcing it to pull back. "You taught us to adapt," Rivera shouts over the gunfire. "To overcome superior positions through tactical flexibility. Did you think I forgot?" As if on cue, the foreign contractors deploy small autonomous drones equipped with tear gas dispensers. The chemical agents begin filling the command center, forcing Manuel to don his gas mask. The mask limits his peripheral vision, exactly what Rivera was counting on. Through the growing haze, Manuel spots movement, tactical teams approaching from multiple angles, using the gas as cover. Their infrared strobes mark them as friendly. Forces to prevent friendly fire? It's a textbook breach operation. "Think, Eduardo," Manuel mutters, using Rivera's first name for the first time. "What else did I teach you about gas warfare?" He triggers his final environmental control. Industrial-grade fans, originally installed for grain processing. The powerful ventilation system creates cyclonic air patterns, turning the tear gas against the attacking forces. In the confusion, Manuel changes position again, moving to a prepared sniper nest with an elevated angle on the breach points. "Your mother would be proud," Rivera calls out, his voice strained by his own gas mask. "She was investigating my unit, wasn't she? Getting close to exposing our cartel connections." Manuel's finger tightens on the trigger. "So you knew all this time?" "I was there that night," Rivera admits. "Following orders, just like now." The confession hangs in the air as Manuel processes this revelation. Through his scope, he spots Rivera directing his men from behind a reinforced position. The shot would be challenging but possible. "You have one chance, Sergeant," Rivera continues. "Surrender now, destroy the evidence, and your daughter lives." "The cartels can be generous to those who cooperate." Manuel's radio crackles with a new voice. "Elena, Papa, I'm at the checkpoint. The federal teams are almost in position. Just need 5 more minutes. The command center's defenses are failing. The foreign contractors have breached the outer security perimeter, and their specialized equipment is methodically defeating each automated defense system. Rivera's men have established complete containment, cutting off all conventional escape. Roots, Manuel chambers another round, the sound echoing through the smoke-filled room. "You forgot the final lesson, Eduardo." He lines up his shot carefully. Sometimes victory isn't about surviving. It's about choosing the right moment to strike. The Barrett's report is deafening in the enclosed space. The round travels through a gap in the reinforced barriers, passes through a cloud of tear gas, and finds its mark. Not Rivera, but the central support beam above his position. The structure collapses, forcing Rivera's teams to scatter and regroup. In that moment of chaos, Manuel activates his last surprise. The command center's floor splits open, revealing a hidden elevator shaft. As he descends into the darkness, he triggers a series of cascading explosions, not to kill, but to trap the attacking forces in a maze of collapsed tunnels and dead ends. "Patience, Eduardo," Manuel transmits on all frequencies. "The real lesson is about to begin." The elevator descends deeper than any of their tunnel mapping equipment had detected, into a network of abandoned silver mines that honeycomb the entire valley. In the darkness, Manuel Torres, El Fantasma, prepares for the final phase of a plan 10 years in the making. Deep in the abandoned silver mines, Manuel navigates through passages that haven't seen human traffic in decades. His night vision goggles reveal old mining equipment and support beams, transformed over the years into a labyrinth of tactical positions. Each junction and chamber has been carefully prepared, marked with infrared beacons visible only through his specialized equipment. Above ground, Rivera's forces discover the elevator shaft, but their tunnel mapping equipment warns of structural instabilities throughout the system. The foreign contractors deploy mining robots equipped with ground-penetrating radar, only to have their signals scattered by deposits of silver ore and centuries-old mining equipment. He's turned the entire mountain into a fortress, one of the contractors reports to Rivera. These tunnels go down at least 300 meters, with dozens of branching paths. Rivera studies the preliminary scans, recognition dawning in his eyes. These aren't just mining tunnels anymore, they're shooting galleries. He turns to Javier Zarate, who's growing increasingly agitated. Your cartel's been using this valley for years, never realizing you were under surveillance the entire time. Javier spits in disgust. You said you knew his tactics, Captain, that you could predict his moves. I thought I did, Rivera admits. But this, he gestures to the complex network of tunnels on their screens. This isn't tactics, this is strategy. He's been planning this for years. Deep in the mines, Manuel's radio crackles with Elena's voice. Papa, we're in position. Federal teams have established a perimeter. They're moving to cut off the cartel's escape routes. Good, Manuel responds quietly. How many made it? 4 tactical teams, plus Uncle Diego's special response unit. The DEA is 15 minutes out. There's a pause. They're jamming most frequencies, but the evidence is already spreading online. Major news networks are picking up the story. Manuel allows himself a moment of satisfaction before refocusing on his immediate surroundings. Through decades of military experience, he's learned to sense subtle changes in air pressure and temperature that indicate movement in tunnel systems. Someone is following him, professionals, moving almost silently through the darkness. Spetsnaz, tunnel warfare techniques, he mutters, recognizing their methodical approach. The foreign contractors are living up to their reputation, using specialized equipment and training developed for subsurface operations. Manuel moves to his first prepared position, overlooking a junction where 3 tunnels converge. He spent years memorizing every angle, every shadow, every potential line of sight. The Barrett would be too unwieldy in these close quarters, so he switches to a suppressed DMR, perfectly suited for the medium ranges of tunnel warfare. There, pushing us into a corner, Rivera's voice echoes through the tunnels, transmitted on multiple frequencies to bypass jamming. That's what you always taught us about tunnel clearing operations. Control the space, force the enemy to react. Manuel keys his radio once, letting them detect his position. The foreign contractors immediately adjust their approach, moving with the precision of experienced urban warfare specialists. But in their confidence, they miss the subtle signs Manuel has left, marks on the walls indicating pre-sighted killing zones. The first contractor team rounds a corner, their thermal imaging equipment struggling with the complex heat signatures of the old mining equipment. Manuel's first shot strikes a support beam at precisely the right angle, causing a controlled collapse that separates the team from their backup. Still teaching lessons, Eduardo, Manuel transmits, already moving to his next position. Here's one about tunnel warfare. Sound can be deceptive underground. His voice echoes through multiple speakers he's positioned throughout the mine, making it impossible to pinpoint his location. The foreign contractors switch to hand signals, their training evident in their disciplined response to the disorientation. The silver ore disrupts their communications, Manuel explains to Elena over their secure channel. Another gift from your mother. She's the one who discovered these old mining surveys, showed me how the geological formations could be used tactically. Above ground, Javier loses patience. Enough games. Bring in the demolition charges. We'll collapse the entire system. And risk destroying the evidence you came to contain? Rivera counters. The cartel won't appreciate that failure. Manuel's next shot takes out the contractor's primary mapping drone, its explosion causing a cascade of false readings on their remaining equipment. In the confusion, he triggers another series of controlled collapses, forcing the attackers to retreat from certain tunnels while funneling others toward prepared ambush points. "Your mother documented everything," Manuel continues, speaking to Elena while maintaining his tactical advantage. "Every bribe, every corrupt official, every connection between the cartels and legitimate businesses. But she knew paper trails weren't enough. We needed them to expose themselves, to prove their reach went far beyond what anyone suspected." Elena's voice is thick with emotion. "That's why you let them think they had tactical superiority. You wanted them to commit their best resources, reveal their true capabilities." "Yes," Manuel confirms, moving deeper into the mind system. "Tonight wasn't about defending our land. It was about completing your mother's mission, making them so. Confident in their overwhelming force that they'd deploy everything. The military helicopters, the foreign contractors, the corrupted special forces. All of it documented now, impossible to deny." Rivera's voice cuts through again, closer now. "Is that what this is about, Sergeant? Revenge for Maria?" "No, Eduardo," Manuel responds, his voice eerily calm. "It's about justice, something you forgot how to recognize." He triggers another set of charges, not to collapse tunnels this time, but to flood specific sections with the same grain dust mixture from earlier. The foreign contractors' advanced equipment, their thermal imaging and motion sensors, all become useless in the artificial storm. In the silver mine's deepest level, Manuel reaches a massive chamber that once served as the main ore processing area. Ancient mining equipment casts strange shadows in his night vision, creating a ghostly tableau of industrial archaeology. This is where he'll make his final stand, a place where modern technology meets centuries-old terrain. The federal teams are securing the surface, Elena reports, but we've got a problem. Cartel reinforcements are arriving, at least 20 vehicles. They're setting up anti-aircraft positions to keep the federal helicopters at bay. Manuel checks his ammunition. They're desperate now. The evidence is public, but they need to control the narrative. A shootout with a crazed ex-soldier sounds better than an exposed conspiracy. In the tunnels above, Rivera's teams have regrouped. The foreign contractors have switched to old-school mining techniques, using simple tools and pressure gauges to navigate the dust-filled passages. They're adapting just as he taught them. "You know what happens next, Sergeant?" Rivera calls out. "The cartel will sacrifice everyone to contain this. The contractors, my men, even Javier. They've already started erasing connections, burning paper trails." "Paper trails don't matter anymore, Eduardo," Manuel responds, his voice echoing through multiple speakers. "Everything's been encrypted and distributed through secure channels. Dead man's switches are already activated. The truth about Maria's murder, about your unit's corruption, about the international banking connections, it's all coming out." A new voice breaks through their communications. Javier, finally losing his composure. "Enough! Rivera! You promised me his head. You said you could break him." "You can't break what's already broken," Manuel transmits calmly. "That's what none of you understood. The day you killed Maria, you created something else. Not a farmer, not even a sniper. You created a ghost. The chamber's ancient ventilation system groans to life, activated by remote sensors. Dust and debris begin swirling in complex patterns, creating a disorienting environment that negates the attacker's remaining technical advantages. In the chaos, Manuel's years of preparation become apparent. Every piece of old equipment, every shadow and alcove has been positioned to create the perfect hunting ground. "They called me El Fantasma long before I met you, Eduardo," Manuel continues, his voice seemingly coming from everywhere at once. "But it wasn't because I could disappear. It was because I could see what others couldn't. The patterns, the connections, the truth beneath the surface." The first team of foreign contractors enters the chamber, moving with practiced precision despite their technological disadvantages. Manuel's first shot doesn't target them directly. Instead, it triggers a cascade of carefully positioned mirrors, creating a disorienting array of reflected laser sights that make it impossible to identify the real threat. Maria showed me the bigger picture, Manuel explains, more to himself than his attackers. How the cartels were evolving, using legitimate businesses, corrupting military units, establishing international connections. She knew they'd never stop with just our region. Rivera's voice cuts through the chaos, closer now. And what about Elena? Are you willing to sacrifice her future for this crusade? Elena's future was at stake the moment they killed her mother, Manuel responds. But unlike you, Eduardo, I made sure she'd be ready for what's coming. The chamber erupts in controlled chaos as Manuel triggers his final defensive measures. The old mining equipment, rigged with modern actuators, comes to life. Conveyor belts start moving, ore crushers grinding, creating a cacophony of industrial noise that makes tactical communication impossible. Through his specialized optics, Manuel watches the foreign contractors split into smaller teams, trying to establish a containment perimeter. They're good, perhaps the best he's ever faced, but they're fighting on his terms now, in an environment he spent years preparing. Your mother wasn't just investigating the cartels, he transmits to Elena. On their secure channel, she found evidence of something bigger. International banks laundering money, weapons being moved through legitimate military channels, political connections reaching the highest levels. That's why they killed her? Elena asks, her voice tight with emotion. They killed her because she refused to look the other way, Manuel corrects, because she believed that evidence and truth could still matter, that justice wasn't just a word. The first real engagement in the chamber is swift and decisive. 3 foreign contractors, moving to flank what they think is Manuel's position, trigger a series of synchronized charges. The explosions are small, precisely calculated to disable rather than kill, but they force the attackers to bunch up, exactly as planned. Manuel's shots come from multiple angles, seeming to defy the laws of physics. In reality, he's using the chamber's architecture, the positioned mirrors, and years of preparation to create impossible angles. One by one, the foreign contractors go down, their specialized equipment useless against old-fashioned geometry and patience. I remember the day you taught us about psychological warfare, Rivera calls out, his voice betraying growing frustration. How the fear of a sniper can be more effective than the sniper himself. Good lesson, Manuel acknowledges. Here's another one. The best trap isn't the one your enemy can't escape. It's the one they think they can do. The ancient mining chamber has become a theater of shadows and deception. Manuel's voice continues to echo from multiple sources as Rivera's remaining forces attempt to penetrate his defensive position. The foreign contractors have abandoned their high-tech equipment, relying now on basic combat skills and thermal flares that cast eerie shadows through the swirling dust. The federal teams are fully engaged with cartel reinforcements up top, Elena reports through their secure channel. Uncle Diego says they've identified military-grade weapons being used by the cartel forces. Every shot, every piece of equipment they deploy is just adding to the evidence. Good, Manuel responds, moving silently between prepared positions. Rivera's men are down to standard tactical gear. The contractors have lost their technical advantage. Now it's just training against experience. Through his specialized optics, Manuel watches Rivera orchestrating a classic pincer movement. His former student hasn't forgotten his lessons about coordinated assaults, but he's overlooking a crucial detail. The chamber's ancient ventilation system isn't just moving dust around randomly. You taught us that a sniper's greatest asset is patience, Rivera calls out, his voice carrying through the industrial cacophony. But you also taught us about tactical reality. You're surrounded, outnumbered, with no escape route. Even your legendary patience has limits. Manuel triggers another series of synchronized charges, not to cause damage, but to alter the chamber's air currents. The dust patterns shift, creating visual corridors that force Rivera's teams to adjust their approach. You're assuming I want to escape, Eduardo. Another tactical mistake. Javier's voice cuts through their communications again, nearly hysterical now. Enough games! Rivera, finish this, or my men topside will execute everyone, including your precious federal contacts. They can try, Manuel responds calmly. But those federal teams aren't just random officers. They're the ones who stayed clean, the ones Maria trusted. They've been waiting years for this moment, gathering their own evidence, building their own cases. A burst of gunfire erupts as one of the contractor teams spots movement. Their rounds strike a carefully positioned mirror array, creating a cascade of reflected laser sights that forces them to waste precious ammunition on phantoms. Your mother died for nothing, Rivera shouts, frustration finally cracking his professional demeanor. The cartels are too powerful, their connections too deep. Even with your evidence, they'll survive. They always do. Maria didn't die for nothing, Manuel corrects, his voice steel hard. She died because she believed in justice, in truth, the same things you once believed in, Eduardo, before you convinced yourself that survival matters more than honor. The chamber's machines grind and shriek, their synchronized movements creating patterns of sound and shadow that Manuel has rehearsed countless times. Each position, each angle of attack has been calculated and prepared over years of patient planning. The contractors are pulling back, Elena reports. They're signaling some kind of internal emergency topside. Manuel nods, though she can't see him. Their employers are cutting ties, trying to distance themselves before the evidence goes fully public. Professional mercenaries don't stick around when their paychecks are in doubt. Rivera must realize the same thing as his next move becomes more aggressive. His remaining forces push forward in a coordinated assault, using the last of their specialized breaching charges to try to collapse Manuel's defensive position. You're not just fighting for the farm anymore, are you? Rivera calls out. This was never about defending your land. It was about forcing us to expose ourselves, to commit our resources where they could be documented. Almost there, Eduardo, Manuel acknowledges. But you're missing the bigger picture. Again. Through the dust and chaos, Manuel spots movement. Rivera himself moving with the skill that once made him the pride of the special forces. He's using the chamber's industrial equipment as cover, advancing methodically while his remaining men provide suppressing fire. The picture doesn't matter anymore, Rivera shouts. The cartels will sacrifice everything to contain this. The contractors, my men, even Javier. They're already burning their connections, eliminating witnesses. Exactly. Manuel responds, his voice now coming from a single source. That's what Maria discovered. The cartels aren't the real power. They're just tools, attack dogs for something bigger. International banks, corrupt officials, corporate interests that profit from the chaos. Rivera's team reaches what they believe is Manuel's position, only to find another clever arrangement of mirrors and speakers. But in their moment of confusion, Manuel springs his final trap. The chamber's ventilation system reverses suddenly, creating a vortex that turns the lingering grain dust into a blinding storm. Uncle Diego reports the federal teams have fully contained the surface area. Elena's voice comes through clearly. On their secure channel, the cartel reinforcements are in retreat. DEA teams are documenting everything. The military hardware, the contractors' equipment, all of it. Manuel moves like a ghost through the chaos he's created. Decades of experience, guiding him through the zero-visibility environment. This was never about winning a firefight, Eduardo, he calls out. It was about creating a scenario so perfect, so irresistible, that they'd commit everything to it. Every illegal weapon, every corrupt official, every international connection, all of it exposed in one night. The mining chamber has become a war zone of shadows and ricocheting sounds. Rivera's remaining forces are scattered, their tactical formation broken by the swirling vortex of grain dust. Through the chaos, Manuel moves with deadly precision, each step calculated from years of rehearsal in this very space. The evidence is hitting major news networks, Elena reports through their secure channel. International banking connections, weapons trafficking routes, corrupted military units. It's all coming out. Uncle Diego says the cartel's political protection is crumbling. They're already seeing resignations at the highest levels. Your mother would be proud, Manuel responds, his voice barely a whisper. She always said the truth was like water. It finds every crack, every weakness, until the whole dam breaks. Rivera's voice cuts through the industrial cacophony, closer now than ever. You planned this for years, didn't you? Every detail, every contingency, the farm, the tunnels, the evidence, it was all a giant trap. Not a trap, Eduardo, Manuel corrects, moving through the dust storm with practiced ease. A revelation, the same one Maria discovered before they killed her. The cartels aren't the disease, they're a symptom of greed, of corruption, of powerful people who think they're above justice. Through his specialized optics, Manuel watches Rivera's tactical movement. His former student is good, perhaps the best he ever trained, but he's still thinking like a soldier, looking for conventional solutions to an unconventional problem. The Federales have Javier. Elena's voice comes through urgently. He tried to run, but Uncle Diego's team intercepted him. He's already talking, trying to save himself by naming names. Of course he is, Manuel acknowledges. Men like Javier are just middlemen. The real powers, the ones Maria discovered, they're already disposing of their assets, burning their connections. But it's too late. The evidence is everywhere now. Impossible to contain. The chamber's machinery continues its carefully orchestrated dance, creating patterns of sound and movement that Manuel has memorized over countless rehearsals. Each grinding gear, each shrieking belt, serves a purpose in his grand design. You're not just fighting the cartels anymore, Rivera shouts, his voice betraying a mix of anger and dawning understanding. This is bigger than our region, bigger than Mexico. The international banks, the weapons dealers, the corrupt officials, they'll hunt you forever. They already hunt me, Eduardo, Manuel responds calmly. They have been since the day they killed Maria. The difference is, now they'll have to do it in the light, where everyone can see them for what they are. A burst of gunfire erupts as Rivera's team spots movement in the dust storm. But Manuel is already gone, leaving only another clever arrangement of mirrors and shadows. The chamber's ventilation system shifts again, creating new patterns in the chaos. Uncle Diego reports multiple helicopters approaching, Elena warns. Not cartel. Looks like Federal Judicial Police and International Task Force units. Right on schedule, Manuel confirms. The evidence we released didn't just expose the corruption. It activated dozens of existing investigations, cases that were stalled because they couldn't prove the connections Maria discovered. Rivera must sense the changing tide. His next moves become more desperate, more aggressive. Even if you win tonight, what then? The cartels will rebuild. New corrupt officials will take power. The cycle never ends. The cycle ends tonight, Eduardo, Manuel declares, his voice now coming from everywhere and nowhere. Not because we'll destroy the cartels, but because we've exposed the true face of corruption. The bankers in their clean suits, the politicians, with their empty promises, the military officers who sold their honor. They can't hide anymore. Through the dust storm, Manuel spots Rivera making his final push. His former student has shed his tactical gear, moving with the pure skill that once made him a legend in the special forces. But there's something else in his movement now, a desperation that betrays his failing resolve. It was never about the farm, was it? Rivera calls out, piecing together the full scope of Manuel's plan. The land, the tunnels, the defensive positions. It was all theater, designed to draw us in, to make us commit our full resources. Almost there, Manuel acknowledges. But you're still thinking too small. This wasn't just about exposing the cartel's military capabilities or their corrupt allies. It was about creating a moment, a perfect storm where all the pieces would be visible at once. The chamber's machinery reaches a crescendo, the synchronized movements creating a disorienting symphony of industrial chaos. Manuel moves through it like a ghost, every step and angle calculated from years of preparation. Maria's investigation didn't just uncover corruption, he continues, his voice carrying through the chaos. She found the architecture of modern crime, how legitimate businesses launder cartel money, how banks finance drug wars while pretending to fight them, how politicians profit from the very violence they claim to oppose. The mining chamber has become a battleground of psychological warfare. The industrial machinery, synchronized to Manuel's precise timing, creates an ever-shifting maze of sound and shadow. Rivera's remaining men struggle to maintain formation in the disorienting environment, their training useless against years of meticulous preparation. Federal teams are securing the evidence from the command center, Elena reports. The cartel's international connections are being exposed in real time. Banking records, weapons shipments, political payoffs. It's all hitting the major news networks. And the backup drives? Manuel asks, moving silently through his prepared positions. Secured and authenticated. Uncle Diego says international task forces are already moving on multiple targets. The banks can't hide their connections anymore. Rivera's voice cuts through the chaos, closer than ever. You used me, didn't you? Knew I'd bring in the best equipment, the foreign contractors, everything that would prove the cartel's international backing. You used yourself, Eduardo. Manuel responds, his voice echoing from multiple sources. The moment you chose money over honor, you became part of the evidence Maria was gathering. The chamber's ventilation system shifts again, creating new patterns. In the grain dust storm, through his specialized optics, Manuel watches Rivera abandoning conventional tactics, moving now with the desperate precision of a man who realizes he's been outmaneuvered on every level. The cartels are just the visible cancer, Manuel continues, systematically eliminating Rivera's remaining tactical options. The real disease is in the boardrooms, the political offices, the military commands where people convince themselves that profit matters more than justice. Uncle Diego reports multiple high-level arrests in progress. Elena's voice comes through urgently. Banking executives, military officials, political figures, they're all scrambling to cut deals to save themselves. Manuel triggers another sequence in the chamber's machinery, creating a disorienting symphony of industrial noise. Your mother understood the true power of evidence, Elena, not just to convict criminals, but to expose the systems that protect them. Rivera's team attempts another coordinated assault, but their movements are desperate now, lacking the professional precision that marked their earlier attacks. Through the chaos, Manuel spots Rivera himself, moving with the skill that once made him legendary in the special forces. It was never about winning a war against the cartels, Manuel calls out, his voice carrying through the mechanical cacophony. It was about exposing the war itself, how it's funded, who profits from it, who really controls it. You think exposing. The truth is enough, Rivera shouts back, his frustration evident. These people, they control banks, governments, armies. They control shadows, Manuel corrects, moving like a ghost through the environment he's spent years preparing, and shadows vanish in the light. That's what Maria discovered, what they killed her to protect. The entire system depends on secrecy, on plausible deniability. Through his scope, Manuel watches Rivera's tactical decisions becoming more erratic. His former student is realizing the true scope of the trap he's walked into, not just a physical ambush, but a strategic nightmare. That's destroying the very power structure he sold his soul to protect. The federal judicial police are securing the surface access points, Elena reports. International arrest warrants are being executed across 3 continents. The evidence chains are holding, Papa. Everything Maria started, everything you built, it's all coming together. Rivera makes his final push, abandoning his remaining men to move alone through the dust storm. His movement is pure special forces training now, each step calculated despite the chaos surrounding him. You taught us that every sniper needs an exit strategy, Rivera calls out, his voice carrying a new edge of desperation. What's yours, Sergeant? The people you're exposing, they don't just kill their enemies, they erase them. That's where you're wrong, Eduardo, Manuel responds, his voice now coming from a single source. True justice doesn't need an exit strategy. It needs witnesses, people willing to stand in the light and speak the truth. The chamber's machinery reaches its final crescendo, the synchronized movements creating a disorienting peak of industrial chaos. Manuel moves through it with practiced ease, every step and angle calculated from years of preparation. Maria understood. Something you forgot, he continues, systematically eliminating Rivera's tactical options. The most powerful weapon against corruption isn't a bullet or a bomb, it's exposure. The truth, documented and distributed so widely that no one can contain it, the ancient mining chamber has become a crucible of justice and revelation. Manuel moves through the swirling chaos with lethal grace, each step calculated through years of preparation. The industrial machinery continues its choreographed performance, creating an environment where modern tactical training becomes a liability rather than an asset. International task forces have secured the banking records, Elena reports through their secure channel. They're freezing accounts across 3 continents. The financial network is collapsing. Rivera, now isolated from his remaining forces, advances through the dust storm with the desperate precision of a man who realizes he's fighting not just for survival, but for the remnants of his identity. The contractors are surrendering on the surface, Elena continues. Their employers have gone dark, cutting all connections. Uncle Diego says they're already offering to testify about their recruitment, their funding sources. Maria always said money was the weak link, Manuel responds, tracking Rivera's movement through his specialized optics. Even the most loyal mercenaries start questioning their allegiance when the payments stop. The chamber's ventilation system shifts again, creating new patterns in the artificial storm. Through the chaos, Manuel spots Rivera making his final approach. His former student has stripped away his tactical gear, moving now with the pure skill that once made him the pride of the special forces. You remember the last lesson I taught you, Eduardo? Manuel's voice echoes through the chamber. About the difference between a soldier and a warrior? A soldier follows orders, Rivera responds, his voice carrying a mix of bitterness and resignation. A warrior follows his conscience. And which are you now? Manuel asks, systematically eliminating Rivera's remaining tactical options through carefully timed machinery movements. I'm what the world made me, Rivera shoots back, attempting to use the industrial noise to mask his position. What this war made all of us. You think exposing the corruption will change anything? There will always be more cartels, more corrupt officials, more dirty money. You still don't understand, Manuel responds, his voice now coming from a single source. This was never about ending the war. It was about exposing who really profits from it. The bankers, the politicians, the arms dealers who get rich while pretending to fight the violence they create. Elena's voice cuts through on their secure channel. Federal teams have breached the cartel's command center. They're securing hard drives, financial records, everything that proves the international connections. Rivera makes his final push, using techniques Manuel himself taught him years ago. But in the confined space of the chamber, surrounded by machinery moving to Manuel's precise timing, even perfect tactical training becomes predictable. "You taught us that every sniper has a perfect moment," Rivera calls out, trying to draw Manuel into a final confrontation. "When all the variables align, when the target presents itself. What's your perfect moment here, Sergeant?" "You're living it, Eduardo," Manuel responds calmly. "Every move you make, every decision that led you here, it's all part of the evidence." The corrupted Special Forces commander, working with foreign mercenaries, using military-grade weapons to protect cartel interests. Maria couldn't prove these connections existed, but tonight, you proved it for her. The chamber's machinery reaches its final configuration, creating a killing ground that Manuel has rehearsed countless times. Rivera, realizing too late the true nature of his tactical situation, makes one last desperate attempt to regain control. "They'll hunt you forever," Rivera warns, his movement becoming more erratic. "The people behind the banks, behind the weapons shipments, they don't just kill their enemies, they erase them completely." "Good," Manuel responds, his voice carrying a cold certainty. "Let them try. Every attempt to silence us becomes more evidence, more proof of the corruption Maria died exposing. The truth doesn't need to hide anymore, Eduardo. It just needs witnesses brave enough to speak it." Through his scope, Manuel watches Rivera making his final tactical decisions. His former student's movement is still precise, still deadly, but there's a new desperation in his actions, the frantic energy of a man realizing he's not just losing a battle, but destroying everything he once believed in. The federal teams report multiple helicopters approaching, Elena warns. Government officials, international investigators, media crews. Everything's about to go very public. Manuel allows himself a grim smile. Just like Maria planned. The evidence exposed, the connections revealed, all of it documented where they can't hide it anymore. He shifts position, preparing for the final confrontation. The perfect moment isn't when you take the shot, Eduardo. It's when you force your enemy to show their true nature to the world. The mining chamber falls into an eerie silence as the machinery completes its final sequence. Through the settling dust, Manuel and Rivera face each other across the ancient industrial space. Two of Mexico's finest soldiers, teacher and student, now on opposite sides of a moral divide that no tactical training can bridge. The federal teams have secured all evidence, Elena reports. International media is broadcasting live. Uncle Diego says the banking connections are being exposed worldwide. There's no containing it anymore. Rivera stands in the center of the chamber, his weapon lowered but ready. "You engineered all of this, didn't you? Not just the tactical setup, but the strategic exposure. You knew exactly how we'd respond, what resources we'd commit, Maria. Taught me to think bigger than tactical victories," Manuel responds, emerging from the shadows. "She showed me that real change doesn't come from winning firefights. It comes from exposing truth that can't be buried." Through the chamber's ventilation shafts, they can hear the sound of helicopters landing on the surface. The world above is transforming as Maria's evidence, combined with the night's documented proof of corruption, reshapes the landscape of power in Mexico. "They're arresting banking executives in 3 countries, Elena reports. Military commanders, political figures, corporate leaders, all the connections Maria uncovered. The entire network is unraveling." Rivera's hand tightens. On his weapon, "You really think exposing them will make a difference? These people, they own the system. They'll bury the evidence, silence the witnesses, create new shadows to hide in. Look around you, Eduardo." Manuel gestures to the chamber. "Every move you made tonight, every resource you committed, every order you followed, it's all documented. Now, not just evidence of cartel operations, but proof of how deep the corruption really goes." The chamber's remaining dust settles, revealing the full scope of Manuel's preparation. Every angle, Every position, every piece of machinery was positioned to create not just a tactical advantage, but a stage where corruption would be forced to reveal itself. "Your mother died for this," Rivera says, a hint of understanding finally, creeping into his voice, not just to expose the cartels, but to reveal the whole system, the banks that launder their money, the politicians who protect them, the military units they've bought. Maria died because she believed truth was stronger than corruption, Manuel corrects. She knew the cartels were just puppets. The real power was in the boardrooms, the political offices, the military commands, where people like you convince themselves that profit matters more than honor. Above them, the sound of federal operations grows louder. The night's evidence, combined with Maria's years of investigation, has triggered a cascade of revelations that no amount of money or power can contain. "What happens now?" Rivera asks, his weapon still ready but his resolve visibly shaken. "Now you make a choice," Manuel responds, stepping fully into the light. "The same choice I gave all my students, between being a soldier who follows orders and a warrior who follows his conscience." Elena's voice comes through one final time. "Papa, Uncle Diego says they're ready. The whole world is watching now." Rivera looks at his former mentor, seeing not just the legendary sniper, but the man who taught him about honor, about justice, about the true meaning of service. In that moment, the weight of his choices becomes unbearable. "I can't undo what I've done," Rivera admits, his voice heavy with regret. "No," Manuel agrees, "but you can help prevent others from making the same choices. Maria's evidence combined with your testimony about how they corrupt military units, it could save the next generation of soldiers from becoming what you became." The chamber falls silent as Rivera faces his moment of truth. Above them, the machinery of justice grinds forward, exposing decades of corruption to the harsh light of international scrutiny. Finally, Rivera lowers his weapon completely. "I always wondered why you left the special forces," he says quietly, "why you chose to become a farmer. Now I understand. You weren't hiding, you were preparing." "The best sniper position isn't always the highest ground," Manuel responds, quoting one of his old teaching maxims. "Sometimes it's the place they'd never think to look." Rivera nods slowly, then removes his tactical vest and kneels, placing his weapon on the ground. "I'm ready to tell the truth," he says, "about everything. The corruption, the bribes, how they recruit military units, all of it." Manuel steps forward, not as a sniper or a farmer, but as what he's always been, a warrior for justice. Maria believed one person telling the truth could change everything, he says, helping his former student to his feet. "Let's prove she was right." As they emerge from the mining chamber into the dawn of a new day, the full scope of Manuel's victory becomes clear. Not just a tactical triumph over superior forces, but a strategic revelation that will reshape the landscape of power in Mexico. The cartel's international connections were exposed, their banking networks revealed, their political protection crumbling in the face of undeniable evidence. Elena meets them at the surface, where federal teams and international media document every detail of the night's events. The farmer's land, which the cartels thought would be an easy target, had become the cornerstone of their undoing. "Your mother would be proud," Manuel tells his daughter as they watch Rivera begin his testimony. "She always said the truth was like a seed. Plant it in the right place, protect it long enough, and nothing can prevent it from growing." The sun rises over the Torres farm, its light revealing not just the aftermath of a battle, but the beginning of the change Maria died fighting for. The ghosts of the past, corruption, greed, betrayal, giving way to the promise of justice she always believed in. Manuel Torres, the farmer who was once El Fantasma, looks out over his land one last time, not as a battleground to be defended, but as proof that one person's commitment to truth can change the world. The legend of the sniper who turned his farm into a trap for corruption would be told for generations, but the real victory belonged to Maria, the woman who taught him that the most powerful weapon against darkness is the courage to expose it. To light. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.